Hi, welcome to this special class on Unacademy Unlock YouTube platform. Now we will be discussing a very important topic in our General Studies Indian economy syllabus industry. As usual, let us start with uh, the courses that are offered on Unacademy platform. Then we can go on to the topic that we are expected to discuss now. You can see on your screen the top rankers of Unacademy this year. You can see them right from second ranker to the 20th ranker. Very good results. And then proceeding further, those who have taken this subscription for 1 year, those who have taken subscription for 1 year and above for GS and plus, they have been given 3 months extension also. They have been given 3 months extension also for this subscription. And if they are taking subscription between if they are taking subscription between 24th and 30th November, so that is the reason why hurry and take your subscription. Then continuing with this, you have also save one combo. If you are taking admission, this is between 25th and 30th November. Tomorrow is the last date. So if you look at it, between 25th and 30th November, if you are taking admission for GS and optional combined together, the 1 year subscription is not 77,000 rupees, it is only 55,204 rupees. And added to that, you can have 10% more discount by referring our code. You can use the code PKS10. You can refer to this code, and you will get 10% more additional discount also. Altogether, the price will come to be very less compared to what you will be paying in physical classrooms. And you also have the option of learning from so many teachers also on Unacademy platform. And lots of courses have been started on Unacademy platform in the last month. In fact, in this month only, we are still in this month only. In especially optional courses, including our own course, Public Administration for Mains 2022, which we started on 24th November. We also have started courses. The Unacademy also has started courses for Sociology optional, which started on 5th November. For Agriculture optional, which started on 8th November. Political Science 23rd November. And Geography 24th November. You can take admission to all those courses by quoting our referral code PKS10. Then Unacademy also has started new batches for General Studies also. It has started new batches for General Studies also. So what are the new batches for General Studies that we are talking about here? The new batches started for both 2022 and 2023. Mission 2022. Mission 2-year batch for GS 2023. You can take admissions. They will be starting from 1st December. Hurry and take admission there also. And what is the timetable? The batches will be starting from 1st December, and from 1st December to 31st March 22, it will be both prelims and mains. From 1st April to 31st May, it is only prelims, and from 10th June to 10th September, it will be what we call only mains exclusive, Mission ARI1. 16th September will be the mains examination next year. And similarly, you can see for 2 years batch also. And there will be free test series for UPSC CSE. And this test series, the exam was over last Sunday, yesterday. And those who had come out on the top were given these free test series also. and this was called UPSC CSE Mega Combat. Then apart from this, they are also given, students are also given set of 20 GS books curated by the top educators of Unacademy as per the latest trend of UPSC. This will be available only to those who have taken 1 year subscription of GS and optional combo, not for everyone. Then you also have iconic subscription benefits like personal guidance, study planner, live mentoring, test analysis, expert guidance, live classes, weekly tests, study material, unlimited access, structured courses. This is what you will get as part of iconic subscription. So these are all the courses that are available on Unacademy platform. Let us come back and look at the topic that we have to discuss now, industry. As usual, a very good number of questions are asked from this topic every year in your main examination. At least 2-3 questions will be asked from this topic. It can be as part of infrastructure, as part of industry also. So, what we are discussing today is what kind of industrial policies followed by the government of India since independence? What are the major problems faced by Indian industry? What are solutions provided by the government? And more importantly, what should the government do? This is what we will be discussing. This is what we will be discussing. What kind of reforms should be implemented by the government? What kind of solutions we can give to the problems of Indian industry? That is what we study here. Why development of industrial sector is important for the overall growth and development of the country. Why? Because this industrial sector, its productivity is more than that of agriculture sector. And terms of trade are in favor of industrial sector. And the problem with agriculture sector is that there is so much of what we call disguised unemployment in agriculture sector. So it is the industrial sector that can absorb the excess labor of agriculture sector. Please remember, service sector is more capital intensive. That means in service sector there is very less scope for providing employment to the people. Ultimately it is the industrial sector, and ultimately it is the manufacturing sector which has to provide employment to the people. Textile industries, cotton industries, automobile industries, and electronics goods industries. These are the sectors, these are the industries which are expected to provide employment to the people overall. And that is the reason why it becomes very, very important for what we call inclusive and sustainable growth. It is also important for what we call job-led growth also. And in this age of liberalization, privatization, globalization, again, we say that it is the industrial sector's efficiency that can determine our exports, that can improve our balance of payments, that can increase our share in the global trade, and it can also make our country influential among other group of nations. Very, very important. Now, coming back, as you can see it on the screen, what is the industrial policy of the government since independence? That is what we have to ask the question. What has been the industrial policy of the government of India since independence? For the first time, the government of India had come out with the industrial policy resolution in 1948, later in 1955, then in 1977 when the Janata Party came to power, then in 1980 again when Indira Gandhi returned to power, then we had a new industrial policy of 1992. Later in around 2001-2002, the government again had come out with industrial policy, and very recently also the government had come out with changes to its industrial policies. So initially between 1950s and 1990s, the government of India was very much clear about the kind of growth process that it wants to take. So it was a period of socialism wherein the government was investing in the industrial sector with the help of public sector enterprises. The reason being, the private sector was not present at the time of independence. The Britishers, who had ruthlessly exploited the country for 250 years, have also deliberately deindustrialized our country. At the time of independence, we had very few private sector industries like Tatas and Birlas. Otherwise, there was no industrial sector in the country. That is the reason why, out of necessity, the government had no option but to invest in the industries. And the 1955 Industrial Policy Resolution focused more on investing in heavy and large scale industries, which required a huge machinery, technology, and skilled personnel. Why? Because they are the ones who could improve your productivity and output in a short period of time. And it also had spoken about small scale sector, but small scale industry were not given as much importance as the heavy and large scale industries. This is what we call Nehruvian socialism. And because of which there was rapid expansion in these heavy and large scale industries, mostly in the public sector only, you can say exclusively. The government had opted for a mixed economy, so it has allowed the private sector also to function. But this private sector was never given, it was never given complete freedom. In the name of socialism, this private sector was controlled with the help of what is called license quota permit Raj. If you want to set up a new industry, you need to take the licenses from the government. And the government would fix quotas regarding your output. Then you have to take permission from the government regarding your exports and imports. This is what we say as part of this LQP Raj, license quota permit Raj. So the private sector was completely controlled and regulated by the government, because of which it could not grow also. It only resulted in what we call systematic corruption due to what we call crony socialism, unholy nexus between the businessmen, bureaucrats, and most importantly the politicians. They use these license quotas and permits to extract a huge amount of bribes from businessmen. Businessmen are more than happy to pay the bribes because the government was giving them the necessary protection also. It resulted in corruption. And what is the consequence of this? Even though the government invested heavily in the public sector enterprises as part of its industrial policies, these public sector enterprises never really performed according to the expectations of the government. On the other hand, most of them were incurring losses in spite of the fact that they were given monopoly by the state. They were given monopoly because the government felt that they needed some kind of protection, which was a wrong thinking on the part of the government. You can improve your efficiency only when there is perfect competition, but not in case of monopoly. Since it was a monopoly, these public sector enterprises never gave importance to either the quality of services, the quality of goods they produced, or to the prices or the cost of production. So obviously, none of the policies, none of the objectives that we had set for ourselves as part of industrial policy were achieved. We spoke about self-reliance. We spoke about improving our exports. We spoke improving our exports. We spoke about reducing our imports. We spoke about job-led growth. We spoke about improving infrastructure. We spoke about ensuring rapid economic growth and development. We spoke about inclusive growth. We spoke about controlling inflation. But none of these objectives were achieved. Private sector was not allowed to grow. Public sector did not grow. Because of which, in those first 40 years of our independence, we say that we had what we call Hindu rate of growth. Average rate of growth of our economy was hovering between 3 to 3.5%. Even though the potential was very much higher, but the potential was never realized in reality because of the fact that economy was strangulated by inefficient public sector enterprises and also by this license quota permit Raj, wherein the private sector was never allowed to grow also. So what happened? By 1991, we had seen the adverse consequences of this policy of the government by 1991. What were the adverse consequences? What we have seen by 1991 was a complete collapse of what we call Indian economy. By 1991, Indian economy had collapsed. It had completely collapsed by 1991. It has uh, went into a serious debt crisis. We had only foreign exchange reserves in 1991 that was sufficient to pay only the 3 weeks of our imports. After that, we would be defaulting on our on our import obligations. The situation was very dire, very serious. That is when the government had no option but to implement what we call economic reforms. As part of these economic reforms, in 1992, the government of India had come out with what is called a new industrial policy. What is this new industrial policy? It is a radical departure from the previous policies. The previous policies gave importance to public sector enterprises, they gave importance to license quota permit Raj, they give importance to socialism. What did the government do? They have dismantled this license quota permit Raj. The private sector was given complete freedom to invest, to produce, to allocate, and to determine the prices on the basis of demand and supply in the market. The private sector was given complete independence. And then the government also has ended the monopoly of public sector enterprises. These public sector enterprises were asked to either perform or perish. It has ended the protection given to public sector enterprises. It has asked these public sector enterprises to compete with the private sector on a level playing field. The government also has opted for what we call globalization. As part of this globalization, the government had ended the restrictions on foreign investment and foreign trade. This process was started in 1980s but gained momentum in 1990s. It has completely ended all the restrictions on foreign trade and foreign investment except some of them, so that it would provide the much needed impetus for our industry to grow in a rapid manner. But when these reforms were implemented, it has benefited mostly what we call the service sector. Service sector benefited mostly because of these reforms, but the manufacturing sector remained problematic. Manufacturing sector remained problematic. It has not resulted in a significant improvement in industrial sector and manufacturing sector. It has mostly benefited the service sector. Service sector's contribution in the GDP had grown tremendously. If you look at it in the current financial year, the service sector is contributing almost 57.5% to our GDP, whereas industrial sector contribution, the manufacturing sector, industrial sector contribution is hovering around only 18%, 70 to 18%. What are the reasons why this industrial sector has not been able to, what are the reasons why this industrial sector has not been able to perform well in spite of this liberalization, privatization and globalization? And what are the major problems faced by the industry now? What are the problems, what are the policies that the present government had come out to solve those problems? And what should be done? That is what the topic of our discussion for today. What are the major problems faced by Indian industry? What are the policies of the present government to solve those problems and what should be done? Let us look at all of them one by one, starting with major problems faced by Indian industry. First and foremost, very high cost of production. This is where the problem is. If you have to export something, as Adam Smith speaks about, absolute advantage, David Ricardo talks about relative advantage. This relative advantage is more pragmatic than absolute advantage that Adam Smith talks about, because almost every country in the world is producing almost everything, but only the fact that some countries have relative advantage in terms of producing some goods and services. That is what we call specialization. Now, what is happening with India is that we are fast losing even the relative advantage also that we enjoyed because of various problems. Because of this, what we call high cost of production. The production costs in our country are so high that it makes our goods less competitive in the international market. I am not talking about services. We are talking about the goods produced by the industrial sector. For example, take the case of automobiles, electronic products, textiles, cotton, iron and steel. So if you look at all of them in our core industries, the basic problem is very high cost of production. Take the case of textile sector in India. The textile sector suffered from all kinds of problems that you can imagine, in spite of the fact that the government had come out with so many policies. We'll talk about those policies later. So what are the problems here? High cost of production. First and foremost, the power charges are very high, electricity, because of what we call the cross subsidization that we have in our electricity power sector. Almost every state government is given this power free of cost to the farmers. And how do they compensate for the losses? They would compensate for the losses by charging more from the industrial sector. For commercial purposes, for industrial usage, the government is charging 14 rupees, 15 rupees per unit, which is highly unsustainable. Compared to the neighboring countries, compared to other countries, automatically you are starting with a huge amount of disadvantage. Next one is our rate of interest, rate of interest is still very high, which results in more increased cost of production. Real rate of interest is still very high compared to other countries. Take the case of right now Japan and other European countries. The real rate of interest is negative. Our real rate of interest is still very high compared to those countries. This is another problem that we face, which results in more cost of production. This is another problem that we face because of which results in more cost of production. Another problem, you can see it on your screen, is absence of skilled manpower. According to one study, only 2% of our population can be called skilled manpower who can get jobs, productive employment in the private sector. We have not been able to transform our demographic bulge into demographic dividend. We simply have failed to provide much needed skills to our population so that they can get productive employment in industrial organizations. Our manpower is not at all, they don't have skills. The blame should be mostly on our education system. Even after 75 years after independence also, we have continued with the education system that was introduced by Lord Macaulay to serve the interests of East India Company. The objective of the education system at that point of time was to produce an army of clerks to work for East India Company. Unfortunately, we have not made significant changes to our education system. We have not focused on improving skills. We have not focused on vocational education, vocational training. We have not focused on practical aspects of the requirements of job as part of our education system. It focuses too much on theory, too much on academic aspects, which is completely removed from the practical realities of life. And another problem with this education system is that most of the colleges and universities do not have the necessary infrastructure also. Our universities are producing, our colleges and universities are producing huge amount of MBAs, engineers and other professionals, but they don't have the skills to work in the real private sector. That is where the problem. Why? Because the standards are very, very low. You can imagine even people from IITs, the IIT graduates are also finding it difficult to get productive employment. You can understand about other colleges and universities because there is no control over them. That is what another problem is. Next problem that we find which is being faced by the industrial sector is the intense competition from neighboring countries. The basic problem here is that our neighboring countries and ourselves, we are competing for the same markets for exports. I'll just give you one more example here. Take the case of again the textile exports. Bangladesh is our very tough competitor for textile exports, for apparels, textiles, and other ready-made cloth and everything. Bangladesh is our most you know uh, fierce competitor. Bangladesh being a poor country under WTO agreements, Bangladesh can get free access to the markets of America, whereas India is no longer a poor country. Being a developing country, America can impose tariffs on Indian products. So what happens? Automatically, Indian products would become less competitive in the international market because of the fact that Bangladesh can export its products without any tax burden. Whereas when we export them to those countries, we have to immediately pay the taxes also. So what we have to do? We have to offset the advantage that Bangladesh enjoys by improving our productivity and efficiency. But are the conditions present in the country to offset the advantage of Bangladesh in this aspect? Not at all. Why? Because as I said, everything is very high. The production costs are very high. The production costs are very high. This is where India is losing out in terms of exports also. I am talking about manufacturing sector and industrial sector. We are not talking about the service sector. That is what we have to remember here. Next, you can see here on your screen, next problem is increasing prices of raw material. One of the important negative consequences of inflation is it results in a huge amount of increase in the prices of all other commodities also, which we call it as spiraling effect. The raw material prices are also going up. When the prices of raw material go up, then what happens automatically? The cost of production also will go up. When the cost of production goes up, then automatically the prices also will go up, the output prices. When the output prices go up, it will result in your goods becoming less competitive in the international market. And this is what exactly happening with India also. Especially our manufacturing sector, it is facing so many difficulties because of increasing the prices of raw material. Even if you look at now, this core inflation, right? We're not talking about headline inflation. The core inflation at this point of time in India is in double digits, which clearly shows the kind of price pressure on these raw materials. And that is what another major problem that our industrial sector is facing. Then another problem is very high fuel prices, including power, petrol, and diesel. What happened with Corona? With Corona, suddenly the incomes of the central and state governments had come down drastically, and they needed money for their day-to-day expenses. On the other hand, the central and state governments were expected to spend more amount of money to provide relief to the people who are affected by Corona. They don't have the money. So the only way they can get the money is by raising these petrol and diesel prices. You can see in the last 2 years, these petrol and diesel prices had gone up by 50%, 60% also. That is where the problem is. So what happens when there is an increase in these petrol and diesel prices? Automatically it will result in increase in the prices of all other goods also, because transportation costs would automatically go up. But unfortunately, what we can see is that neither the central government nor the state governments had the kind of foresight and vision to not to use this petrol and diesel taxes as a most important source of revenue. On the other hand, either they kept on increasing those prices. Obviously, it results in what is called more cost push inflation. Obviously, it results in more of what we call cost push inflation also. And this is what is happening in India. With this cost push inflation, automatically it is the manufacturing sector that has suffered the most, because on one hand, because of complete lockdown that the government implemented, very rigid, very tight lockdown that the government implemented for 2 months, there was absolutely no demand for their products. Most of them had to close down their industries, factories. On other hand, once lockdown was relaxed, they could not recover on time because of very high fuel prices also. This is another reason why we see that our manufacturing sector was facing so many issues because of this high fuel prices. So the question here is that why people don't protest against price hike in petroleum. So what is happening here is that, Sunidhi, if the prices are increased by one political party, then other political parties can come onto the street and protest, right? If the prices are increased by the central government, the ruling political party at the center, then other political parties, opposition parties, would come onto the streets and increase the when protest. Now what is happening is that the state governments are also increasing the prices, taxes. Whenever the central government increases the taxes, the state governments are also benefiting out of it. And on the other hand, state governments are also increasing their own taxes to make up for the loss of revenues during the corona crisis. So what happens when every political party is part of this crime? They remain silent. Most of the protests have to be organized by the political parties. In our democracy, we have not reached a stage wherein people come onto the streets and protest on their own. For example, in Germany, when German government had increased the prices of this diesel and petrol, what did the people do? They took up their cars and they left the cars on the roads, in the middle of the road, to express their protest. And the government had no option but to come down and reduce the prices. But in India, we don't have that kind of a civil society activism. In India, we don't have that kind of activism on the part of the people. And this is being used by the political parties to exploit ordinary citizens. Why? Because at the end of the day, at the time of elections, what do the political parties do? They will stabilize the prices. They will not increase the prices for that period of elections. They will not increase the prices for that period of elections. People think that the prices had come down during this during this Bengal elections. For those 1.5 2 months, the government did not increase the prices. But after that, the government simply keep on. And the state governments are also very happy, because whenever the central government is imposing more taxes, state governments will get 42% of those taxes. They want more money. When the GST council meeting was held some time back, the central government had asked the state governments to think about bringing GST under this under sorry, thinking about bringing petrol and diesel under GST. But this was never implemented by the government, the state governments. They said that they will never accept the fact that bringing the petrol and diesel under GST. Why? Because they would be losing huge amount of revenues. Please remember, 30 years back, on petrol and diesel, the taxes were 1 rupee or 2 rupees, maximum 2.5 rupees. Now you can see the taxes are almost 70 rupees. the taxes imposed by the central and state governments combined together. And it is also very easy for them. Why? Because they don't have to do anything. In case of other taxes, they have to spend money to collect the taxes. Now they can get the money very easily also. They can get the very money. They don't have to spend money on collecting the taxes also. And since petrol and diesel are essential commodities, people have no option. This is what we study in economics. In case of essential commodities, the demand is inelastic. That is what we study in case of essential commodities. What do we mean by that? Whatever may be the prices, the demand will always be there. In spite of the fact that the petrol and diesel prices had gone up by leaps and bounds in the last 18 months or so, the consumption had not come down even a little bit also. Only during the time of the lockdown, the consumption had come down. But otherwise, the consumption never really came down. Why? Because the governments know, the central and state governments, people have no option but to take out their vehicles. People have no option but to travel. And that is what really making the central and state governments completely immune to the demands of reduction in petroleum prices. And these high fuel prices are adversely impacting our industry. They are having a huge amount of negative impact on the industrial growth and development. As if these taxes on petrol and diesel and power are not enough. In the last 7 years, what did Government of India do? The Government of India, electric vehicles, electric vehicles, simply it will not be any kind of loss for the governments here. Electric vehicles will not be a loss for the government because they will impose more taxes on power. They will impose more taxes on power. Otherwise, that will not change the situation at the ground level as such. That will not change the situation at the ground level. They will impose more taxes on power, the state governments and central government. Already this power is not part of GST also. They will impose more taxes on power. Why? Because again the basic problem here is that we have to go back to the same thing, lack of awareness among the people. Because people are voting only for those political parties who give them free subsidies. They think that when the vaccines are given free of cost, they think that it is coming to them free of cost. They don't realize the fact that the government is charging huge amount of money from them for vaccines in the name of petroleum taxes. When the government is giving them food subsidies, they think that it is coming free of cost. They don't realize that again the government is charging huge amount of money. This is where we say the problem is. And unless we increase awareness among the people, these things will continue forever. In the last few years, as I said, it has increased also. On top of it, what happened since 2017? Since 2017, what we have witnessed was, since 2017, we have seen a decline in the GDP growth rates. From a high of 8%, it had come down to, in last year, the first quarter, less than 3.5%. From high of 8%, it has come down to less than 3.5%. So when the GDP comes down, automatically the tax revenues of the government also will come down, especially of the central government. And what did the central government do to propel the tax revenues? They kept on increasing the tax rates, especially the customs and excise duties. Customs and excise duties, they are imposed on imports and exports respectively. They kept on increasing these customs and excise duties to offset for loss in tax revenues due to decline in GDP. We are going back to what we call the protection autarky Raj that the country had seen before 1991. Some of the taxes that are imposed by the present government on imports have almost reached the levels of pre-1991 also. That is where the government is going completely in the wrong direction. It was completely moving in the wrong direction. Arvind Pangaria, former chief economic advisor, had written so many articles clearly mentioning how these very high taxation policies of the central government are resulting in deindustrialization of the country also. Why? Because this industrial sector, manufacturing sector, requires so much of raw material from foreign countries. And this raw material is heavily taxed. For example, during the corona times also, you will be surprised to know that the state governments have strongly opposed in the GST Council meeting reducing taxes on the imports of oxygen cylinders also. They said that we will be losing our revenues, but don't reduce taxes. That is the kind of attitude of the political class in the country. That is where the problem is. So they believe that they must exploit the people to the fullest extent by imposing more taxes. Even oxygen cylinders also were not allowed to be supplied by removing the taxes on custom duties. That is the kind of you know uh, governments that we have in the GST Council meeting. That is what the state governments have said. They do not want any kind of reduction in taxes. On the other hand, every state government was favoring more imposition of taxes. Then the central government, for reasons best known to them, had only been hell-bent on increasing the taxes on customs and excise duty, these customs and excise duties. And that is the reason why last year when Donald Trump came to India, last reason why when Donald Trump came to India, he called India in front of our Prime Minister, he called India tariff king, the kind of tariffs that we impose on imports. That is where again the problem is. I'll just give you one example here how China has seen such a rapid growth. China has drastically reduced all the taxes that it was imposing on imports. It has drastically reduced all the taxes it was imposing on imports so that its final cost of production would be very less. And when the final cost of production is very less, automatically it can have advantage in terms of exports. Unfortunately, those who are part of policy making in the government of India don't have that kind of vision. Why? Because they simply cannot think of losing even a single rupee of tax revenue by reducing the taxes. For example, in the last 1 year or so, the petroleum prices had gone up by more than 30 rupees in the last 1 year or so, more than 30-35 rupees. If you look at central and state charges combined together, they had gone up by even 35-40 rupees also. And what is the amount of reduction that the government had brought in? Only 5 rupees. You are increasing the prices by 35-40 rupees, you are reducing them by only 5 rupees, just to wipe out the tears of the people. In spite of the fact that the government had accepted that economy has recovered very fast, in spite of this corona and lockdown. Still, and in spite of the fact that this year tax revenues are above the estimates in the budget also, still the government is not willing to reduce the taxes because it is just like a lion which is used to the taste of human blood and human flesh. In the same manner, the government has tasted this easy revenues from these petroleum and diesel taxes and also from customs and excise duties. They don't have the kind of vision to think about the long-term consequences, adverse consequences. They don't have. No one in the government has this kind of attitude. Neither the finance minister nor the prime minister's economic advisory council nor the highest decision-making powers within the government. They simply don't have this kind of vision that a very flexible tax regime is what that can propel economy on a large scale. On the other hand, right? Yes, exactly. I'll come to those things. RCEP, I'll come to those things. right? On the other hand, you know, the governments, whenever they increase the customs and excise duties, they will say that it is for self-reliance. They want everything to be produced in the country. This self-reliance and self-sufficiency is one of those ideas whose time will never come, because no country in the world can ever be self-reliant. No country in the world can ever be self-sufficient. And this is where the government is going horribly wrong in terms of its industrial policies. Then, proceeding further, this is where I am coming to your point here. Failure of the government to enter into international treaties and agreements. RCEP, if you talk to any economist outside the country, India has missed out on a golden opportunity to become part of this RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Treaty, wherein you would have got access, unlimited access to the markets of most of the countries around the world who are your major business partners also. But again, the government had adopted extremely conservative approach, wherein it was thinking more about protecting the interests of what we call our inefficient domestic private sector, saying that when we sign this RCEP, we will not have the freedom to impose taxes to protect domestic private sector. And in the name of protecting this domestic private sector, the government was willing to sacrifice the interests of more than 1.4 billion people also. Again, very flawed economic policy. The government should have jumped onto sign RCEP. On the other hand, the government should have challenged the private sector to improve their efficiency rather than depending on this protectionism. Why again? Because the government might say that it wanted to protect the domestic private sector, but in reality, the government was getting so much of revenues through these taxes, customs and excise duties, and the government will have to reduce all of them. The government is not in a position to reduce all of them. I said, the government is used to getting so much of easy revenues. It never realized the fact that by entering into those treaties, by becoming part of those treaties, it can improve its exports. It can earn a huge amount of revenues also by improving its exports. That is what we call the visionary skills and foresight. Unfortunately, which again policymakers within the government never had. And unfortunately, you can blame our bureaucracy also. Bureaucracy is highly conservative. They can never imagine taking such right kind of radical decisions. This is what again another reason. Next reason why our industrial sector is facing so much of a problem is because of, as you can see it on the screen, depreciation of our currency. Indian currency has become volatile and it is getting depreciated because of various factors. Most of the factors are not in our hands also. Depreciation of our currency. When the currency depreciates in the international market, automatically it makes your imports costlier. When your imports become costlier, automatically it makes your exports relatively less competitive in the international market, and it will also have a huge amount of impact on your balance of trade and balance of payments also. And more importantly, as I said, it is your industrial sector which suffer the most, because suddenly they can see huge amount of increase in their cost of production. This depreciation along with a huge amount of taxes means that industrial sector will have to think 100 times before importing something from the foreign countries, given the much needed necessary technology and capital and machinery. They have to think 100 times. This is where another problem. And of course, the most important problem, as you can see here on your screen also, red tapeism. In spite of the fact that we have implemented economic reform 30 years back, our bureaucracy, the attitude is still to corner more power unto themselves. The attitude of our bureaucracy is to keep all the power in their own hands, whether it is the officials working in the industry department, in the Ministry of Environment and Forest, in the Finance Ministry, or other ministries. They believe that they can they can control the country better, control the private sector with those with those outdated laws, rules and regulations. As our Prime Minister keeps on saying, we still are continuing with what is called Inspector Raj. But of course, he has not really bothered to implement the reforms there. That is more important. He has not really bothered to implement the reforms. This bureaucratic red tapeism is also is one of the reasons why our industrial sector is facing problems. Next here, right? Another reason here is that the government also has failed as part of its industrial policies to prevent the emergence of monopolies in the market. These regulatory authorities have simply completely failed to prevent the emergence of monopolies in the market. What are we talking about here? For example, take the case of infrastructure sector. What we are witnessing is emergence of these monopolies. In the port sector, Adani's. In the airport, again Adani's. In other sectors, other core industries, Ambani's. So this kind of a monopoly, where it is deliberate or not, what we can be sure of is that the regulatory authorities have simply failed to prevent these monopolies. Take the case of telecom sector. We have only 2-3 telecom service providers. Go back to 10 years, we had at least 32 telecom service providers. Why it had come down to only 3? It is anybody's guess. That was the failure of government. The failure of the government to prevent what we call crony capitalism is also one of the reasons for our failure to ensure industrialization of our country. Next one is jobless growth. As we have mentioned, whatever the industrial sector that is progressing, it is not resulting in providing a meaningful employment to the people. As we discussed earlier, it is a problem with both demand side and supply side. From the supply side, we are not able to train our young people to get productive employment in the industrial sector. From the demand side, industrial sector is also not demanding huge amount of jobs. Why? Because of stagnation in their business. Take the case of automobile industries. In automobile industries, in telecom industry, in other industries, what we are witnessing is in a retrenchment in the last 1.5 years or so due to corona and also due to recession. And what we are witnessing is also the fact that these industries are not recruiting more also because of what is called these inventories piling up. Obviously, it is not providing more jobs to the people also. On the other hand, we speak about all the time MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, MSMEs. But the work at the ground level is not there to show the results of the efforts made by the government. Why? Because MSMEs also face the same kind of problems that we have discussed now. These MSMEs are facing the problem of a high power tariff. They are facing the problems of a skilled personnel. They are facing the problems of a high cost of imports. They are facing the problems of high transportation costs. They are facing the problems of mismatch in the labor markets. Whether you are a small scale industry or a large scale industry, you are facing the same kind of problems. This is where the government is just simply getting out of the growth path. On the other hand, the government believes that they by coming out with more schemes or by renaming the schemes, they think that they can ensure this industrial growth, which is not the case. As you can see, the next point here, high cost of land acquisition due to implementation of land acquisition laws by the state governments. Again, populism. So, with the implementation of land acquisition laws, in urban areas, you have to provide twice the market price. In rural areas, you have to provide 4 times the market price. So it has become almost impossible for the industrial sector to acquire land, because of this land acquisition laws. So whatever the advantages that we had as a low cost production country, all those advantages are being completely wiped out. The land prices are going up, and due to high levels of inflation, even the salary and wages are also going up because of high cost of imports due to high amount of taxes. Again, our cost of production is also going up. Altogether, what is happening is that we are becoming less competitive in the international market because of all kinds of bottlenecks that we have seen here. Proceeding further, as I said, next problem which you can see it on your screen here is the absence of skilled manpower. Most of these organizations are suffering from the absence of skilled manpower. There is a growing mismatch between what they are demanding and what is being supplied by the market. This absence of skilled manpower, what is happening is that those who have the skills, they are in great demand, and because of which in the labor market, what you can see is that some professions, the top level professionals, are getting a huge amount of salaries, running into crores of rupees, whereas most of them are forced to work at below their potential. This is where another problem is. Another reason why we are facing problems here is our failure to attract FDI into manufacturing sector. If you look at it, in the last 1 year, the government has said that they have attracted almost $80 billion of FDI. This is what economic survey and later the Ministry of Industries also has spoken about. $80 billion of FDI, which is very good. $80 billion is a huge amount of money. But what happened? The devil always lies in the details. Maximum amount of FDI went only into service sector. And this maximum amount of FDI went into very few industries. For example, Reliance Industries Limited had signed so many agreements during this period of Corona, wherein they got huge amount of FDI. Similarly, mostly this service sector has attracted 98%, 95% of FDI, whereas manufacturing sector has simply failed to attract FDI. And this is where we need a lot of FDI. Why? Because why would they come and invest here? On the other hand, what we are witnessing is most of the FDI going out of the country also. Take the case of this Mercedes Benz. You know, they have decided to leave the country, and they have said that they have invested around $2 billion in our country. They cannot do business in our country. They have their factories in Chennai, so in Tamil Nadu. They said that they are leaving the country. Why? Because of very high tax regimes. They said that the taxes have become so unbearable that it is almost impossible for them to do business in India. They will treat the $2 billion that they have invested as a sunk cost, and they are leaving the country. So what is happening is that the government is looking at the FDI that we are getting, saying that India has become an attractive destination for FDI. But again, it is going into only service sector, where employment potential is almost nil, and it is not helping in what we call inclusive and sustainable growth. And this is where again the problem is. Simply we are not attracting FDI into manufacturing sector. Take the case of automobile sector. Take the case of power sector. Take the case of even this pharmaceutical sector. Take the case of these other sectors, textile sector. Why? Because simply the conditions are not present for the foreigners to come and invest in your own country. On top of it, we started these programs like Atmanirbhar Bharat, which are sending wrong kind of signals to the foreigners. That we'll talk about later. Next problem, as you can see it here, is a failure to invest in research and development. When Indian economy was growing at 9% per annum between 2005 and 2011, what did our industry do? Domestic industry. Take the case of car manufacturing, our domestic car manufacturing industry. What did they do? They earned a huge amount of profits. Instead of investing those profits in research and development, they use the money to give dividends to their shareholders to increase the salaries of their employees. Most of the money went into only what is called revenue expenditure. And so most of them are going into most of nobody really bothered to invest in research and development. Take the case of this electric cars. What they should have done is they should have invested in the technologies in electric cars, which they have not done. That is the reason why India again is lagging behind in terms of these research and development, which again is impacting our manufacturing sector, Yes, during the Corona crisis, some of these companies were leaving China, but all of them were going to Vietnam, Singapore or Hong Kong, South Korea, but they are not coming to India. Why? Because, as I said, India has simply failed to learn from the mistakes it is committing. Still, we say that we want more foreign investment. That is where the problem is. So this is what we say about the reasons why you know our industrial sector or manufacturing sector is facing so many challenges. In the coming YouTube classes, we will look at the solutions also. I think the time is up. In the coming classes, we will also look at the solutions to overcome all these problems. First, we will look at what are the solutions offered by the government in the form of policies, major policies. Then, why those solutions have not been successful, and finally, what should be done. That is what we will be looking in the coming classes. Till then,